Hi, and welcome. My name is David Hopper. I'm here with my friend Joe Garceau. There are so many spiritual topics to discuss, and today we're going to talk about purpose and the spiritual path and what your purpose might be, and how are you relating to what we call the higher self, the soul. We can talk about definitions as we go along. But first, I want to introduce both myself and Joe Garceau. We'll start with Joe.
Okay. Hi, I'm Joe Garceau. I'm going to introduce myself a little and
Yes,
tell
please.
you that I've been on a spiritual path, I think, my entire life. And for me, it's always been a question of what happened when I was 8 years old. I'd been told that I would skip a grade, and I was feeling pretty cocky about the whole thing. A week later, when my father was scolding us, and I said, well, I wasn't going behind the door. And a voice spoke in my head and said, it's true that you're pretty smart, but it's really not for you. You have to help a lot of people. And I've been thinking that that's been my soul who talked to me very early on. And I've been working with the soul literally ever since. When I went to college, I had to choose something to do. And I remembered that in my family, we did a lot of political talking. And so I took politics. And lo and behold, years later, I could look back and say, I think that was the soul guiding me at that point because I was really the first woman in the political science department who actually tried to graduate in political science. I argued that might does not make right. And 20 years later, I became the assistant to the governor of our state here in the United States. Um, Behind all of my activity, behind raising a family of four children, I was always wondering what was it the soul wanted me to do next. And so here we are talking today.
Hi, my name is David Hopper, and I've been with what I call spiritual teachings for about 45 years. And it did not start out that way for me 40 some years ago, where I was in a very emotionally distraught and mentally distraught place in my life and did not know who I was, where I was going, and what I was doing. So I sort of stumbled onto a path, basically through what's called theosophy. Um, you can look up a real extended definition on that online, but it basically has to do with understanding my inner nature, which is my soul. I came to discover my soul and what the soul is to me, and this is actually it's my true self. So it's been a discovery about who I am as a person. I'm still discovering this, of course. And it's understanding what makes me up. I can talk about, I have my ID, my who I am, but it's basically about learning about my spiritual self. Well, my path continues every day, every minute, every second, where I'm constantly awakening about who I am, about what are my thoughts, what are my feelings, and what do they mean as far as how I express myself to other people. I'm learning about service and giving and loving and things like this. This has all expanded my awareness about who I am.
Well, David, you know that I'm a storyteller. So I'm always
Sure, go
going back
ahead. Yes.
to what fits. And I can tell you that, golly, long about, it was exactly 1989. I went on a vision quest, the only one I ever went on. But I happened to be out in the California desert in a uniquely hot period of time unexpectedly. It was hot, I'm saying, and all I had was a little tarp and 3 gallons of water for 3 days in the wilderness. And
You learn the fine art of sipping then, don't you?
pardon me.
You learn the fine art of sipping. You're in the
Yeah.
desert, right?
The climax to this 3 days of sheer hell, uh, and maybe I'm over exaggerating, but the climax of this is that I took a healing quartz called the Herkimer diamond and I planted it on top of a little hill about 150 yards higher than where I'd been camping. Made a little nest at the top of this mountain and put a piece of cedar in there, and then I put my crystal in and I covered it over. And here's the key thing: I had been out there for 3 days, and the only thing that I was aware of was sky and desert and the planes that would fly over from uh, the East Coast to Los Angeles. And so what came up for me was as I planted this Herkimer diamond, I pledged myself that I would always be a transformer and that stone that I was placing there would be the receiver sending station for the eventually millions of people who would undoubtedly fly over this particular point. Of course, then I had no idea what was going to happen with that. But as I reflect back now, I know that since 1989, I've really embraced the concept of being a communicator of spiritual ideas.
For spiritual ideas, we have, well, there's many forms of spirituality from different religions and different practices around the world, and perhaps one of the ones we can talk about is the concept of the expression of love and will. I'm expressing my love in the world, and I do it through service. I give to other people. I give of my time. I want to express a higher, well, a perhaps another extended or awakening, help other people awaken. This can be a service that I can provide. And I was wondering, in your case, have you thought about the concept of service and expanding your awareness and working with the concept of awakening?
Golly, I'll pick up the last, the concept of awakening. Some years ago, woman who had had a spiritual experience that was Kundalini in effect, decided to teach about Kundalini and that energy that flows through one from the divine. And um, so I was in this group. It grew rapidly. We were about, oh, maybe 100 when we started. And within a year, there were over 2,000 people from around the world who had joined this group on Kundalini. One day, one woman said to the group, Kundalini, Kundalini. I've got Kundalini, but what's this business about, spirituality? What's the relationship here? And I pondered about it and I responded to her saying, I know that you go out every night and put your bed down beside a fence that borders on a forest. And you say that the reason you go out there is because you want to be near to the trees. But in fact, there is energy coming from those trees that I think you relate to. Nature is incredibly important to you as a spiritual foundation. Or you can talk about love or light, peace or joy. Or you can talk about what is it that you do for individuals in your life, how you serve. And every one of those are different ways of identifying what is the spiritual path. So, David, I'm putting it back on you.
Sure.
What forms of service do you provide to people?
Well, I've written a few books, but basically my stories, not stories, but my books are basically about how to connect with my higher self. It's more of an understanding about call the soul, and there's certain energy dynamics about that. It's like there's some of the ancient Indian mystics. A guy named Patanjali 2,000 years ago talked about establishing what's called a meditation practice, And that practice is made up of meditation, learning meditation, learning do spiritual study, and then also getting involved with service. So it becomes what I call a golden triangle of life, where you basically live this every single day. However, my own personal expression of this is each individual have their own awareness based on their own awakening inside themselves. But it's the idea that the meditation, spiritual study, and practice helps expand my awareness, expand my consciousness, if you will. And therefore, I have a greater understanding of life, and I can relate to people better. I can relate to the work I do or my purpose and have a sense of my own continued awakening and expanded awareness.
So you've used the word purpose, and I hear you saying that your purpose is to be of service to other people, to be of service to other people by describing what the spiritual path looks like and how one behaves spiritual path. Is would you say that's a fair assessment?
Yes, of course, the spiritual path, based on a person's personal upbringing, you know, I personally was not raised in any religious environment, so therefore I was agnostic when I was raised, but I since then in the last 40 some years with my spirituality, my own expanded awareness, my own studies that I've done, um, I have learned I have learned that I have a higher self, which I call the soul. Other people, I'm not sure what other people may call it, but their spiritual self, whatever that part of myself, which I'm in tune with through meditation, um, I I connect with that spiritual self, and it gives me guidance because it can it conditions, it gives me impressions. Impressions are like thought energy that come into my consciousness about how I might conduct myself, or I might involve myself in a new service project, or getting involved with other people in service related activities. Um, it's part of who I am. It's part of how I have conducted myself, and I attract myself to groups and people who are aligned with these teachings and understanding too, which can be very many. It can be it doesn't have to be just my own esoteric community, but it can also be with other people who I can relate to, and I can act as a coach for some people, or I can act as I can give some impression about what they may be going through or what might be interesting for them to expand their awareness on.
Well, I'm thinking about all the possibilities that I could pick up from what you were just speaking about. But I think I'm going to go back still to nature, as I did with my first comment about the woman who took her bedroll out and laid it out beside the fence that was adjacent to the forest. I have another forest story where, of all things, a gentleman, probably mid age, called me one day and wanted to know if I could tell him what was the best time that he could sign a contract for a brand new car. That unique question. I mean, for it, there's a particular description for what kind of astrology that is, and it isn't one that I happen to practice a great deal. But I took him on. I said, "Well, at least tell me about who you are and why are you asking this question?" And we talked a little while. He gave me his birth date, and I set up a chart. And I looked at it, and now he hasn't given me his background at all. And I said, I'm looking at this and I see that you have a real interest in nature, that when you're in nature, you feel a resonance with a vibration, if you will, an energy of inclusion, that you are a part of all that is around you. And I elaborate on that more. But anyway, not more than 2 or 3 minutes. And then I said to the fellow, "What do you do?" And he said, "Well, interestingly, I have been the forester for one of the states in this country for about 30 years." So I know that nature itself is a primary way that you, the listener, and I can relate to one another and to that sense of being part of the truth, the reality, the light that shines for all of us. It's nature that is leading so many of us today.
Yes, this is I resonate with that too. I love being in nature myself because I see nature as as a natural spiritual harmony. It's already it already knows its own perfection, and so therefore meditation for me is another form of nature. What is my soul's nature? What is my nature as a personality in relation to that soul? My nature is wanting to align, become one with my soul's nature and that harmony. And as a result, it helps harmonize my thoughts, troubled thoughts, difficult thoughts, chaotic thoughts, emotions. It helps balance these out so that I can become, I don't know, more real to myself. That's not really the right way to say it, but it's more real for feeling who I really am, and it doesn't feel artificial. It just feels that's the natural part of who I am when I speak when I speak from that place, speaking from the place of the soul, speaking from the place of that quiet harmony personal nature.
I really think that nature is the way that younger people that I meet are always relating more to nature than they are to any dogma. But on the other hand, let's not forget that awakening to the higher self can take many different guises. I have worked with people who come from India, and it's easy for them to uh, different gods and goddesses that I'm not familiar with. Here in the West, we speak of Jesus Christ. But another way that we do a great deal of connecting with our higher selves, peace or joy or light, and particularly love is one of the very large ones that we use. I'm wondering if you found that way of defining the higher self helpful.
One of the one of the things that I've discovered for myself is to to have joy and love and sense of goodwill and understanding and inclusiveness with people and non-separativeness. These are some of the terms we use in esotericism, but basically it's the idea that I feel these energies because I have in my meditations I have thought on these, I have meditated on these, I've contemplated these ideas, and there's an energy about them, about how I express myself with other people, and especially when I'm expressing joy or feeling joy. And there's a particular energy and feeling in my heart and in my thoughts that's energizing and uplifting to me. And so this is important for me, and I teach in my books basically about how to make connection with your higher self, the soul, and establish a spiritual practice. I've talked about these things, so I think it's important that we, in today's world, generally speaking, people are focused on physical plane activities, basically what they experience through their five senses, what they see before them, and that's they think about their emotions or feel about their emotions, or think about their thoughts, and they don't think about these being um, being part of themselves per se. Well, that's what I do. That's what my personality says or does. That's my activity. But they don't think about the fact that the thoughts have energy, the emotions have energy, and that I can directly influence those with my own consciousness because I'm connected with my higher self, the soul. And so there's an understanding about how that the nature of that energy works. And I think just by being in contact with the soul, just being quiet with the still and in a state of listening, that energy of soul is present within your consciousness when you are listening, and you're not have chaotic thoughts, you don't have chaotic emotions, but you're just letting that energy just be with you. And what it does, it soothes me. It's a wave that heals me, so to speak. It uplifts me also, and it gives me guidance. And so this is part of what my service is to myself, and then ultimately I teach this service to other people too.
You mentioned the writing that you've done, and what brought us together is your writing from, concise, specific ways of definition, and I just, something that I liked and I needed. On the other hand, I want to mention also the contrast between us. Uh, it's called Knowing Woman Nurturing the Feminine Soul. And I think the title was a little weird because I meant to imply that everybody's soul was feminine. And that didn't get across to my readers. Nevertheless, what I was doing was showing in that book how many different ways that the higher self can come and appeal to each of us. But here's the other thought that occurs to me is that while I've not published in a way that I did with the book, prior to that, I did a master's degree that was a pretty good sized piece on universal development of stages of faith development, regardless of what religion or the lack thereof, that everybody develops stages of wisdom and stages of spiritual development are there. So we're contrasting, I think, in a way, both the mental and the heart ways of approaching higher mind and the soul, our higher selves.
Well, one thing that I've discovered over my many years, decades of spiritual understanding or connection is the fact that there is an experiential level and then there's an intellectual level, intellectual comprehension and spiritual comprehension. And in my experience, I can directly speak from my own experience, obviously, but in many people's experience, I hear that people are driven by they're driven by the teachings of their particular religious practice, their spiritual practice, and that's their guidance. My personal guidance has been to connect with myself and be on intuition. Now, there's when thoughts or feelings come into my consciousness, I have to discern whether are these coming from news broadcasts, or are they reading something from a book, or is it just intuitively coming to me because I'm connected to my higher self. And so I make that connection. And indeed if they are coming from my higher self, intuitive, whatever, then I listen to these thoughts and see where they take me, and I meditate on that, and I align myself with that and involve myself in whatever activity it feels appropriate to get involved with at the time, um, which doesn't have to be necessarily absolutely definitive. It's just simply as a check on myself. It simply says, well, I'm listening to certain news broadcasts maybe which may upset me, but I simply says, okay, now withdraw, pull yourself back now, and realize your higher self, the sense of joy that you're losing because you're connecting with this energy which is upsetting you. Learn to balance out your emotional nature and be responsible for that. Be mentally aware of the dynamic of that energy going on. So I'm I'm working with that energy, and I hope other people become consciously aware of their own inner dynamic. In my case, I would teach about developing the intuition through meditation.
You use the word joy, and you reminded me of meditation that I'm currently involved in. And I suspect most of our listeners are involved in the same questioning, maybe not as focused yet as my work was in the last couple of days. But, I'm thinking about this great shift that is going on globally, where we're having this question about whether the way the world was governed as a unit 100 years ago and how it's going to be governed in the future, and every single member of humanity today must have to be engrossed in what is this huge transition that is occurring. How does it impact on my personal level, my personal life? What will I be economically, politically, morally able to do in the years that come ahead? With that context, then yesterday I sat down and I had two columns. One said, "What is possible and I can include if I wish." On the one hand, and what is already in place that I simply cannot ignore. At the end of my analysis, I ended up with about 25 things on a screen in front of me. I realized that on the side that I could not ignore, need to take care of myself, my physical well-being, my emotional and my mental well was core. And in the spiritual practices that I follow, I call that the vehicle of the personality. Then on the other side, I had all of these possibilities that the soul was suggesting I might be able to do or not. I fit those two together. Um, you sit there and you look at these two levels and you say, good heavens, what's involved here? And at one point I wrote, oh, look at which one of those really gives me joy. Which one gives me joy? And as soon as I resonated with the feeling of joy, I could go back and say, oh my goodness, this one is service and this one is joy. These are service and joy. And by the end of that review, I was saying, oh, good heavens, joy is what probably is my soul, and it is what prompts me all the time. Over
Yeah,
to you.
yeah, right. That sounds great. The concept of joy is wonderful. And for me, I had no concept of this when I first started out my spiritual practice back in the 1980s. And I had no concept of, balance on my emotional nature and, understanding my thoughts can be directed towards service oriented activity, helping people and helping myself first, of course, and other people from that point. I had no concept of this, and I found that connecting with my higher self, just the energy, just in the presence of my higher self when I'm in meditation, this helped me, like I say, balance myself, bring forth joy. And this was sort of a side effect, which is a wonderful side effect, obviously. Um, but it's also learning that there's a certain here too, because the sense of joy, it's like I meditate and I connect with my higher self, the soul, and I discover that, like I said, joy is a byproduct, which is a wonderful byproduct, but it's also relatively clear thinking too, and there's a way to develop that. And of course we could get into the details of talking about what is a meditation practice and what's made that up and how to create that through meditation, spiritual study, and service, but we won't go into the details necessarily, because I've spoken to that in previous podcasts. But about purpose in the sense of the spiritual path, because it's important that we have a sense of our higher self within us when we are going about our work, whatever we're doing, Well, I mean, we're going to the grocery store, we're driving the car, we're washing the dishes, we're doing the laundry, whatever. And you're interacting with other people, other human beings. And it's like, where am I coming from when I'm doing this? It's like it's becoming consciously aware and of the dynamic within myself. And it's an ongoing process, minute to minute, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, et cetera, et cetera. So it's just simply that's part of the purpose that I focus on and I think is important that other people can possibly relate to also.
David, as you were talking, I was thinking also. Um, when I speak of joy, I want to emphasize that I actually ended up quoting this list of possibilities for myself by saying this one is service and this one is joy. And many of them came together as service and joy. And that prompted me to look at it and say, you know, first of all, we really need to know who we are. We need to examine our own selves very closely. Who am I? Who am I? And then we can ask, what is our purpose? In my own case, I believe that I need to express, and that's the communication. Then aware, I'm aware that I'm getting ideas, and sometimes I want to share those with other people. Uh, so it's, right now for me, it's know, express, and possibly reveal a little bit of extra things that come to mind. But it is joy. It's just joyful. But that happens to be who I really want to know.
The nature of the soul is joy. I mean, the soul, we can intellectually say the soul is made up of love and will and intellect, or the pure expressions of those, the higher or higher expression. But joy is a natural component of the oneness that the soul is oneness and joy together. It's a unity. It's a unity of all those other ideas together. And there's a joy in that sense of beingness and pure awareness that I share in my meditations. And I have that direct sense every time I meditate or connect with my higher self. Could say more on that.
Yeah, I'm thinking about that's really well done. I was thinking about it in terms of uh, rays, which we haven't introduced and we will get into in the future a good deal. But right now, looking at knowing, caring, and doing. And isn't that part of everything that a human being does? Knowing, sharing, and doing. Service, as you put it. And when you put the three together, it's a really joyful experience.
Yeah, because um, the expression of joy it's like when we talk to another human being, we speak to the person on many different levels, and we are usually unconscious of these different levels. I mean, we have a sort of a heart connection. We may have a physical connection. We can have an emotional connection with somebody. We can have an intellectual connection, and we relate to other human beings on this level, or we don't. And we close ourselves down. And of course, if we close ourselves down, then we are not fully enjoying and expressing on a human level with another human being. It's not a full expression of ourself. And there's all sorts of reasons as to why we do that for defensive purposes or for who knows what. Whatever is happening in the moment for whatever we decide is how we want to interact with somebody or something. And so as far as bringing forth the soul's energy, the sense of joy is a definite. It's a presence. It's a presence that when you're connected with the higher self, that higher self can come through you and guide you through the heart, through your sense of uh, well, whatever you're doing. It could be a sense of purpose. I am talking in this podcast right now, and I have a sense of purpose because I'm extrapolating or I'm talking about what is the soul nature to me. And to me, there's a sense of unity there that I'm communicating also. It isn't a fragmented, isolated piece of intellectual material out there somewhere. It's the nature of all human beings. They all have this capacity, and it's helping people awaken to this awareness of who and what we really truly are as soul inspired beings.
You know, David, I had jotted down as a conversation that you and I would have later, but now I see that we can include it right here. I recognize that you and I, as friends, have these absolutely fabulous dialogues where we just riff off of each other. One says one thing, the other one dives in, and then we go back and forth, and we're just so excited. It's so great. And now
I think so
we are
too.
doing something else that is really interesting. That first is a dialogue. And now you folks who are listening to us are the third part, speaking to you and with you. And the dynamic of our one on one has now become a dynamic of three. You, the listener, David, the thinker, and Joe, the relator, are all in a dance together. And it's so joyful. And it's also uh,
Well,
really different than simply
it's
being in.
exciting. That's right. And one thing we can say here, we've mentioned the concept of the spiritual path, and then we can say, what is the purpose? Well, it depends on what particular spiritual orientation you come from. I come from a theosophical orientation, and saying that there is God's plan. There is a plan for the planet. There is a plan for humanity. Humanity made up of 8.1 billion souls in incarnation right now across 190 countries in the world. And all these people have thoughts and feelings, and they all have different levels of expression, physical plane activity expression. We all do this. This is what makes the world what it is. No judgment on that. It is what it is. But it's like now the path of the spirit awakening the soul is for the individual. Me awakens, you, Joe, you awaken. And it's like we recognize, simply saying, oh, well, we have a sense of our purpose is to teach and to uh, elucidate or talk about what the nature of the soul is, the nature of our spiritual path. And so, as much as we do this, it awakens, hopefully, other people to their own individual sense of self, their higher self, their soul. And then they get involved with group activity and expand that toward all humanity. And eventually there is a transformation that takes place, a great transformation where humanity wakes up and becomes conscious of its own consciousness, that becomes aware of itself. And so this is a major goal in spirituality. Now, this is like somewhere way down the road in the future, but individually, of course, we're just talking about right now, just for ourselves, waking up and becoming of ourselves.
Wow. I was in a class this morning where we were studying the triplicity, the triangle. And it occurred to me that even in my extended family, and I'll give you a little thumbnail sketch in a moment, is an implication for the potential of global unity in the future. And now about the family. I've been around on the globe for going on 100 years now, believe it or not, put it that way. I'm laughing. But I was aware as a child that my heritage came from 7 nations from the European side of the Atlantic, from one nation, many nations here on the North American continent, without a little bit of American Indian that I'm very proud of. So there's 8 locations, different heritages involved. You can look at the dynamic of DNA, as many of us do today. And you can see how people all over the globe are relating back to the originators of the race, as an example, just to bring it down to reality. But then come to my own family, extended family. Not only do I have 8 backgrounds, but in the time that I've been alive, I have had the opportunity to become friends with people from many parts of the world, just me alone. But also, my descendants and the descendants of my siblings have extended that uh, unity so that today there is not a continent in the world that is not represented in my very large extended family. That, I think, is harbinger of what we can see as a potential in the next centuries. It isn't going to happen all at once, but we are approaching a new form of global unity.
A form of global unity where we become conscious of our higher selves, of conscious of who we are as human beings. We may not use the same vocabulary or terminology, but we will have a a recognition that I acknowledge you as a person. I'm listening to you. I hear what you're saying. We may not agree all the time, or we may agree. It says simply says, but the concept of the level of struggle that we have had for thousands of years can be perfected and it can be raised up to a new level of understanding and vibration, communication for that matter.